The geostrategic situation in the Arctic is being driven by global warming, and in particular the diminishing sea ice. It's estimated that about 9 to 14% of the sea ice is falling back each decade, and we expect to see an ice-free North Pole region around 2040. Along with this, despite the negative manifestations, it's opening up some economic opportunities, such as new sea lanes and new economic energy resources. This in turn is compelling a political competition for sovereignty of the seabed. A number of nations are putting in claims with the United Nations for an extended continental shelf. Meanwhile, the United States is encouraging freedom of the seas, something which is to be expected of a naval power. All of this is compelling new security responsibilities for the Arctic nations, and this in turn is compelling them to seek out new military capabilities to reach further north. There are a number of challenges to operating in the Arctic region. In particular, this is because despite global warming, the Arctic isn't going to become some placid Mediterranean Sea. There are still going to be ice formations, and there's still going to be extremely severe weather. This can have a detrimental effect on equipment and on operations. Even in marginal ice pack, and even in ice concentrations of less than 10%, which is considered open sea, this can still damage ship propellers, rudders, and sonar domes. In addition, there are a legion of smaller things that can impact equipment. Lubricants freeze, batteries drain a lot faster, and this is all can have a detrimental effect on mission success and requires heavy winterization of every system from the largest to the smallest. In addition, these risks are magnified by the fact that there's limited infrastructure and assets that can operate to provide aid and resupply in the Arctic in the event of an emergency. There's also limited navigational aids, and the nautical charts in the region aren't quite up to par. On top of this, our ability to forecast the weather in the Arctic is currently pretty limited because we don't understand climate change as well as we do typical weather patterns. The last thing that's worth noting is that satellite geometry also leaves sketchy service in the high latitudes. This, combined with sun flares and magnetic interference, can lead to limited communications bandwidth. The armed forces of the circumpolar nations currently have a pretty limited capability to operate in the Arctic region. We'll focus on the maritime domain in particular because this is preeminent in the North Pole region. Looking at Canada first, the RCN has no ice-strengthened vessels, and its submarines cannot operate underneath the ice. In addition, they lack a refueling facility above Newfoundland, and therefore they're limited in the amount of time that they can be on station in the north. Going further south, the United States Navy also does not have any ice-strengthened vessels. In order to make up for this deficiency, the U.S. Arctic strategy explicitly relies on subsurface and aviation assets, and the U.S. has long experience operating subs underneath the ice. Even though the Virginia-class submarine is less capable than the Los Angeles-class submarine due to the lack of an ice-hardened sail, it too is pretty well equipped to operate in the Arctic region. Russia, meanwhile, is numerically superior as far as forces that are stationed in the Arctic. The Northern Fleet is the largest of the 5 fleets in the Russian Navy. They also have a significant number of icebreakers that can facilitate the movement of that fleet. However, a lack of investment has led to some decaying capability, and so we have to be suspicious of whether they actually could project force very far north. Looking at some of the smaller circumpolar nations, Denmark and Norway, it's interesting because they have very bespoke Arctic assets that, unlike the larger nations that need to operate all over the world. Denmark, for example, operates a fleet that is capable not only of operating within the Arctic, but also within the ice. The Knud Rasmussen class vessels are equipped with an ice keel, an ice knife. They also operate a search and rescue boat that is itself ice strengthened. Looking at Norway as well, the Norwegian Coast Guard, which is part of their navy, operates a Svalbard class patrol ship, and it is capable of breaking a meter of ice. It's also equipped with a hangar that can hold 2 helicopters and has azipod thrusters. Both of these have operational advantages in the Arctic region. The armed forces of the circumpolar nations are increasing their capabilities to operate above 66 degrees north. If we look at Canada first, the RCN's key program is the acquisition of 6 to 8 Arctic offshore patrol ships, and the first one of these should be delivered about 2018. In addition, they're building a refueling and berthing facility at Nanisivik, and this will enable the RCN ships to stay on station longer. The United States is a little bit less ambitious. The Arctic strategy openly admits that the ambition is going to be predicated upon global threat assessment and competition for resources. The Navy's current priority is assessing the battle space, assessing the Arctic battle space, and what this essentially means is learning to predict the weather and ice flows better so that surface ships can operate in the region in the future. For the Russians, the primary method by which they're enabling their Arctic capabilities is the reestablishment of a number of Cold War bases across their Arctic territories. Last autumn, we saw them putting in a new runway and a new naval dock on the New Siberian Islands. If they're actually able to see this effort through, which itself is a little bit suspect given the lack of resources, but if they are able to do it, they will be able to project force further into the Arctic than any of the other circumpolar nations. Looking at the smaller countries, Denmark has ordered a 3rd Knud Rasmussen patrol vessel, and that will be rounding out the fleet. That should be the last one that's delivered. And Norway, for its part, has ordered a surveillance vessel that should be handed over this year, 2014, and it will replace a ship that is currently primarily tasked with monitoring Russia's northern fleet. The potential wealth of resources and apparent militarization of the Arctic region has led to a lot of prognostication that there is an impending conflict with the Arctic nations. The odds of this are actually very slim, for the first part because the hydrocarbon deposits are primarily located within the uncontested exclusive economic zones. So if we go deeper into the ocean, there's a lot more suspicion that there are actually substantial resources. In addition, there's a long tradition in the Arctic of cooperation and negotiated settlement of boundary disputes. This includes between apparent antagonists, where Russia and Norway were at loggerheads for many years over a boundary, and that has recently been settled. On top of this, if we look at the military programs specifically, they're not really geared towards an enemy per se, but more geared at dealing with an environment and that environmental challenge of operating in the Arctic. In addition, the programs aren't really quantitatively increasing any of the forces. It can be more seen as a reorientation and a replacement of existing forces in most cases. All of that said, of course, the increasing economic, human, and military activity in the region does come with some risks, and we can expect to see a significant amount of power politics exercised in the region, at least as long as the ice continues to melt.